Let's talk about the long-term impacts of the fallout from what happened with Unity. Now, you might be thinking this is old news, but what's old is that it was thrashing around, it was changing on the daily. Now we're looking at the long-term impacts for literally the next decade or two, and this is where I've been with Unity now as a professional user of it, trainer of people in it, made videos bringing over 10,000 people into it, helped hundreds of projects from teams get made in it. So I'm speaking from a place of experience on how it's impacted our career and field around us, and how I believe it's going to continue to have ripple effects even after they made these changes, right? So for those who missed the beat, the high level, Unity tried to retroactively change the deal on everyone in the pipeline. And this is where they were sending corrections day of to journalists, and I know some of those journalists. The corrections were Unity changing their position based on being called out on exact, precise, fact-checked definitions of what they initially said. They weren't correcting anything. They were in a panic, a spiral. They had not thought this out. They had not vetted this with actual users of the platform. And not only was this incompetent, this maneuver from a developer perspective on how the whole ecosystem works, it was plainly incompetent from a business lens of how business has to get done. And this actually came up for me in what part of why I'm having this visceral reaction already from it. I was guest speaking for a couple of college graduate business courses in the game sphere about what happened with Unity and what we can maybe learn from it. And so we'll get to that in a second. But first, let's just focus on how it impacts people as developers. Now, the reason why this was such a problem, right, is they literally used to have in the terms of service that you could use the terms of service from the time that you agreed to it, that they wouldn't retroactively change that on you. The new deal was they had erased that silently from the history of their terms of service and then had rewritten the rules retroactively to say that suddenly you're going to have to pay us for every single user of your product. And then they kept changing their answers. Is applied on the studio basis, apply on the publisher basis, apply at the platform. Are they going after Nintendo or Microsoft, companies many times larger than Unity in terms of market cap, to try to shake them down for money from a company they didn't ever have an agreement with? And not only, again, is that a foolish move for business reasons, you can't change the terms after the fact on people, but it is also something where legally, for the kind of data tracking you would take to determine are you a separate user, is not allowable under GDPR in the entire continent of Europe, or the EU rather. And in the case of technology-wise, is just not how files and data work either. Like, there's not a technical implementation for this. And at first people asked, Unity, how are you going to solve this? And there were discussions leaked from the forums internally where developers who were going to be responsible to find a way to make that tracking happen, it was news to them when it was publicly announced. It had not been discussed with them how they're going to do it. Unity couldn't answer it, so then Unity pivoted their answer to, okay, well, it's going to be up to developers to solve that problem. And if Unity Central can't find a legal technical solution to it, it sure as hell cannot be offloaded to a bunch of small teams of 2 to 5 developers or even small studios to each try to solve on their own, navigating the legal and technical complexities of what is not a possible thing to do from how poorly thought out the plan was. Now, when I say you can't do it, again, we're back to this kind of gray area of there's lots of nebulous gray area of what is allowable. This is where behaviorally, psychologically, even if you can, even if what you did, I mean, nothing stopped them from saying it, what it does is it shatters the trust permanently. And that's what we're talking about, is the shattered trust permanently, the ripple effect. This is where, yes, the terms as they were changed to after the fact, after the entire community of everywhere from students to small studios to big companies to bigger companies to giants, all combined forces to agree for once to be mad about the same thing or in the same direction on the same days. Enough days in a row got them to pound down and back off their plan and make adjustments to what would have been a less disruptive starting point. There's still problems with it. It's way the hell better. And if they had started where they wound up, people wouldn't have had that backlash. But like one of my peers, who I'm not going to credit by name because he didn't get permission to make this a public statement, but I also want to say I'm taking credit for this idea, put it, it's like if you woke up in the middle of the night and your roommate's standing over you with a knife and you pull a gun out on him and he's like, oh, it was a prank. I wasn't really going to murder you. You have resolved that situation, but you still need to find a different roommate, right? Like, that doesn't change the fact you can't trust this person. And trust is the thing that was shattered. It is to say that as long as we're all on guard, as long as we collectively are ready to rally the troops and drop everything we were doing for the next several months to all of us target our anger and fury at something we have built our careers, our future, our skill set, our studios, our pipelines, our partnerships around, then sure, this will be fine. Until the next time if they try this or some version of this. You can't recover from that, right? You can't. And this is where part of when I talk about this trust and the shattering, breaking of it, because we're talking about, okay, I work with a lot of people who are, frankly, you know, they're somewhere in this gray area of they may be pre-professional, some may never decide to go professional. They're making the games they want to make. They're in some version or lens of it. hobbyist or at the very least passion-pursuing indie who are prioritizing not doing it as a business, but there's a game that they want to make. They want to make that as a game. So you might argue from the outset that this was never going to affect them to begin with, right? This still applied to past a certain threshold, whether it was $100,000, $1 million. It doesn't matter because they're not really making money at scale from the games that they're building. They're making the games they want to make, like game jammers. But these things do not happen in a vacuum, right? When you're doing these things anyway, you're trying to make choices out of at least leaving the door open to someday commercializing this or someday finding a job using these skills doing something else. And this is where the ripple effect, I even saw it immediately at the college club level. So I helped start some of the first consistently successful producing games college game development clubs back in 2007 at Carnegie, back in 2004 at Carnegie Mellon, co-founded GCS, 2010 at Georgia Tech and VGDev. And that first group was before Unity existed, back in, I guess, 2004. It wasn't around yet. We had to write our own stuff. By 2010, Unity was then already probably half the projects in VGDev because of how widely it had been accumulated in the system. Classrooms hadn't caught up to using it yet in the same kind of degree. It was still kind of being new and introduced. Increasingly, people were taking for granted that it was known to them, that was a platform that plenty of people knew that skill set. They were learning on their own. They were using it for jams, using it for club projects, because people had a choice for moving towards it. Well, that's also where I've been teaching part-time at Northeastern this past semester. I visit both of the college game development clubs a couple times out the semester to kind of keep beat on where are students' headspace, what are they doing? Because I think that that's a leading indicator of what's coming down the pipeline for everybody else, right? This is when students have a choice, because the classroom may not give them the choice. I mean, I lead a rapid prototyping class. I let them do whatever they want. They can be in construction paper. They can be in Unreal. They can be in Godot. They can write their own code in Python, C++, assembly. I don't care. But that's not usually the class format. A lot of classes have to kind of lock you into what the teacher or instructor can help you with, what the TAs are to train you in, what the curriculum exists around. So there's delays in the academic structure that the clubs are at the forefront of seeing. When students have a choice, they can drop and pivot on a dime. They don't need permission. They don't got to fit anything else. They can adapt it around what the world is around them. And that is where immediately, urgently, half to 2/3 of the projects of a group that used to only be almost entirely, maybe 7 out of 8 games were done in Unity. Most of those games said they started in Unity and had already pivoted. They were already using Unreal. They were already using Godot or Godot. They were already doing something else. Or they were up front going to be their last Unity game, if nothing else. And this is where, even out of the game studios who have said, okay, well, even after the terms changed, if they didn't urgently pivot already to rewriting their stuff in a different pipeline to get themselves off of that trust ripple effect from Unity, we'll talk a second about why that ripple effect extends even beyond the student and the small studio level. But even if, then this is still their last game that they're doing with it. Because those who are serious about it and doing it as a business are built in, let's say they're on a console, they're on VR, there's something else as a pipeline for it. They don't have a say about when they have to upgrade and update. In order to keep up with the standards of the platform and where the fixes are applicable to Switch or to a Meta Quest or something, they have to update, which means that they don't have the choice to stick to the old version, like someone shipping something on Steam. So that's a big factor for them. Now, I talk about this ripple effect again, going beyond those small to mid-sized studios, where the ones who are saying, okay, even if we haven't pivoted yet, this is still our last project in this platform before we are having to upskill in something else. The other version of this, we look at those studio sides, part of why they're shy about using it and building their core fluency, skill sets, strengths, teams around it, portfolio around it, is because publishers and platforms now don't know what deal they're entering into if a developer chooses Unity. They can't trust that in 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, Unity's not going to try to come after them like they tried to come after the publishers, like they tried to come after Microsoft and Nintendo, saying you're going to owe us money for each of these games. That was not part of an agreement they established with them because they cannot be trusted. And I know John Riccitiello resigned, and I've got a bit of a back history there where John Riccitiello being the new CEO, my third year at EA was, or third year in EA was why I left. Literally on my exit paperwork, my concerns about John Riccitiello's background being, Sara Lee and detergent and a bunch of packaged good commodities, sporting goods or fashion stuff or whatever, was just, I was not impressed with his awareness of what games are becoming. To me, packaged goods commodities are what games I don't want them to become. So that was a concern of mine when I left there. When I worked for a summer at Will Write Stupid Fun Club, and there's not a lot to say about that. That's got multiple layers of NDAs behind it. But what I will say, and I think it's fairly public because Will Write Stupid Fun Club was publicly connected in ways to parts of what EA was doing. John Riccitiello had say in what was happening there. That was part of why I made an active choice to decline the option to stay there full time after that summer. I had to get the hell out of there because I don't trust JR. And sure enough, 2 years after I had started teaching students Unity in that second college game development club, the one at Georgia Tech, that's when he became CEO of Unity, and I knew kind of writing was on the wall. All this said, even though he's resigned, even though I don't like him, even though I don't trust that human being, the people left in his wake are worse. They're not as famous as him. There's not as long of a Wikipedia article, but all the reasons to dislike them. They're not good people. One of my main frustrations or objections to him was his failure to better firewall from his own sense or experience of the actual scene of actual developers and actual companies, which, if nothing else, he has seen in a way of other decision makers in those rooms who did not consult actual developers. At least he had that as a basis to work from, that he didn't do a better job of firewalling them from those terrible decisions. He was the one shot we had at somebody protecting us from that nonsense, and I think that's coming up down the line is worse. The more people know about those other people left behind as decision makers at the top of Unity, the less they trust that pipeline, that engine, that business as an entity. And part of why I need to keep going back to as a business. The tool itself, still a great fit. Sadly, that's part of the frustration. That's part of why so often college clubs gravitated towards it, student, hobbyist, etc., small teams, small studios. It's an easier, better, appropriate pipeline where Godot or Godot, and still no one can agree on how to say it, and I know you're going to correct me in the replies, and whatever, either way is wrong to everybody, is often too small, where the kind of gigs that pay you to use that engine are still not on the same level as even lower paying Unity jobs. There just aren't as many of them, aren't as many studios using that. Now they might pivot, they might change as people are trying to react to this long-term ripple effect. On the other side, Unreal is a remarkably powerful tool. It's a great tool, right? We now have 2 Unreal trainers in home team to better ramp up and part of people pivoting out into Unity. I'm a strong believer in Unreal. I used it professionally. I was with EA when EA transitioned into Unreal 3 as part of a 35 game mega deal. I was at the forefront in terms of on the team that was leading that change within the studio. Strong believer in the technology, but that said, it's a tool that is well accustomed to, if you have a full-time team of experienced professionals who are hyper-specialized in deep code, in deep implementation, deep optimization, deep rigging, deep materials. It is built for specialists on a larger full-time experienced team. It's a little bit harder in the way that Unity better fit the student, scope, club, hobbyist skill set and size and scale for projects coming out of Digipin and Full Sail and UCSC and Carnegie Mellon and whatever. It was a better fit for 2 to 5 people kind of switching hats between doing a little bit of animation, a little bit of code, a little bit of level design, a little bit of sound effects, a little bit of rigging, a little bit of this, that, and the other as they bounce around between things. It was a better pipeline. In fact, the technology, the tool, frustratingly is still good for that. But again, these things do not happen in a vacuum, and that is why the business ripple effect is a problem. Because what it means is that people don't trust that they can build a future around it. And this is where we talk about these ripple effects and these long-term things where I'm talking about, again, 10, 20 timeline, not about how's the news changing next week. The weekly changes are over. That is settled. We're talking now after the smoke is settled, looking ahead from how that war came out, how that battle ended. As an educator, both within conventional academia currently and also still independently, and with many peers in my circles who are either in the same way, long-term, and not in my case, but in their case, tenure-track, professorial, in institutions, lifers in academia. Nothing wrong with that. On the other side, people who are solidly, squarely, only ever, and contentedly teaching online, video courses, high level on Udemy, custom coaching services, all that kind of stuff. Right? Those are my circles. Those are the Venn diagram that I live and exist in. I know a lot of these kind of folks who, like me, have led a lot of people into Unity. And here's where it left educators. And I'm going to be blunt in a way of these are things maybe I'm not supposed to say because it's going to seem disadvantageous to me because I've got strengths in that engine and that platform as a trainer. We are embarrassed and feel guilty. Right? Those 10,000 views on that video led people into getting started in Unity. Don't feel great about that. Now, from the information I had at the time or anybody else did, it was a sensible choice as any. It still beat the alternative of hiring several people to be your engine team, trying to build something ground up. In many ways, it was a better fit before other platforms caught up on having a tier that was suitable for hobby, free, student, etc. But we feel guilty and embarrassed because students came to us trusting us to help set them up for a longer term plan. And we thought it was a safe place for them to build long-term skills, long-term connections, long-term portfolio, long-term things. And we're embarrassed. And so while there is a lag effect in curriculum, in terms of schools, heavy pivoting, and this is where even, 3 years ago, got another friend of mine, don't want to give too many specifics again because didn't agree to be publicly named in this kind of fashion, but not information from me, works with a major school that trains a bunch of game developers. They were already pivoting towards Unreal years ago, before all this blow up, precisely because they already saw that there were higher salaries on Unreal jobs for the kind of companies using Unreal. They're often bigger scale, and there's less competition on that side. It was less saturated in terms of the people who were just coming out of self-taught off YouTube and game jams and stuff. So there are more people using Unity or using Unreal than Unity for that, who are seeking it as a career path, as opposed to, again, I don't want to give the wrong impression. I'm very pro and for build the game you want to build, use what tech as a proper pipeline for it. There's nothing wrong whatsoever, truly nothing. I've got friends who are using Game Maker to make games that they're happy with, either commercially or just for their passion project. Same thing for Construct, same thing for Love 2D, same thing for any pipeline. There's no wrong choice for any of this. RPG Maker, all of it's fine. Twine, good. Nothing wrong with any of these. The question is about if people want to make a career doing this, where should they be building up their fluency and their strength in their case? Right? And that is where already Unreal was for some schools starting to make this choice of if they have students coming in for vocational interest, they want to do this professional long term, they were already leaning a little more towards Unreal. But even though curriculum takes time to shift and change, one of my frustrations back when I was teaching as a PhD student at Georgia Tech was it takes so many years to add or change a course title and a course number that they kind of had to shoehorn me into where there was something else that wasn't quite a fit. And we could rewrite the description, but basically day one and week one of the class would be like, hey, here's what I'm the right guy to teach, so here's what I'm going to teach you. And I know it's not quite the title of this class. That's how these institutions that are built for chemistry and astronomy and calculus and all these other fields, classic literature, they are slower to adapt than the tech field has needed them to be. But that's how those institutions work, and they got their pros and cons, they got their strengths, right? The thing that will not readily recover is that embarrassment, is that frustration, is that guilt for a generation of educators who saw what happened when we helped lead a bunch of people into the pipeline of training themselves in Unity that led to, in the pipeline of the ecosystem of the game industry, the amount of people who were self-taught because it helped them in their classes, because it was supported and complementary to what they were doing in school for their thesis projects on the side of the game jams and other things that interested them, was Unity. That doesn't recover easily. And so at minimum, are we still covering it? Absolutely. Right? It's still being used in home team. We're not going to yank it away. It's still a good choice for certain. If your focus is on a game you're trying to make, certain kind of tool you're trying to use, still could be a good fit. Classic Cerny method. I think y'all know I advocate now. Mark Cerny's talk. Did it as part of my rap prototyping course. Did it as part of my, every chance I get him banging the drum on this. I encourage, like one of my cards in home team for people new to the group of like understanding the industry. Mark Cerny's talk from 2002, GDC DICE, GDC Europe. The slides are online. The talk's online for free. You should check it out if you haven't yet. Part of that pipeline, right, is build in whatever's fastest for you to build in, to prototype, to test the idea, to get it working on device and on screen. And then, if you can justify that it's getting traction, people are talking about it, you love it, you put it in front of a mentor, someone who's got experience and insight, who could say that there's something here, this is the thing to build on. At that point, your plan might be to pivot that into a slower pipeline, better tech, more proprietary, better business arrangement deal that's not the way you first built it in. Part of it made Unity a bit of a unicorn in the space when it started. It was one of the first clear answers of there were different ways to use Unity, right? And this is part of my strengths in a trainer. And because I'm a rap prototyper by trade, I saw this distinction extra delineated than a lot of other people did. Unity was in an unusual space. And again, technically the software still is in this case. The business has changed how this works. Unity used to be this case where you could rapid prototype. You could use it in the game jam style. You could use it in the trash and hack and the sloppy style in a way that was really much harder to pivot a more high performance, more ship on console level engine, at least historically like Unreal. And then, instead of the old Cerny method of, okay, well, we rapid prototyped in Flash or whatever, we got to rebuild it from the ground up using custom code for Wii or something like we did for Boom Blocks. Instead, what wound up happening was you could sort of ship a thesis, replace piece by piece, right? So you'd have a student project. Outer Wilds, probably a great example of this, right? Came out of USC, I think, under Jeremy Gibson, and I'm feeling good at Peter Brinson, I think. A couple of advisors and faculty there and a great team. To their credit, and again, like they built this prototype in Unity. The version that shipped eventually years later, after indicator recognition, before IGF recognition, somewhere in the middle on Switch and Steam and PS4 ? These all the different systems, right, that came out on. It was still Unity, but they had rewritten deep things about how the sound works, how the mechanics work, how the event system works, how they were able to piece by piece replace the prototype approach with a more shippable version, which it still made sense to do. But when your business case is, well, we don't want to build a long-term plan on using this tech platform, then it becomes you're back to the Cerny method of prototyping what's fast for you and get your ideas down, let you sketch and think from a design level, not how do I do it, but what do I want to have try happening to check and see if this works any good, but then to go back and re-implement stuff from the ground up. It means that you might be using it to prototype internally, cheaply, efficiently, fast. Like for a while, we were using XNA inside of a bigger studio just to test ideas, to then feel out, okay, well, is this worth prototyping in engine where it's going to be slower for a corporate, proprietary, bigger company product? And it just changes that plan for where you're going to build your longer term stuff around. But there's so much you need fluency. So there's also so back to this point about professors and instructors in classrooms. You're immediately already seeing, and I'm seeing, and I'm witnessing it up front from the students doing it, a diversification of their portfolios. And there's good things to this too, right? Where they no longer are settling in on every single project in this class as Unity. They're trying other stuff. And there's good things about that. As someone who came up before Unity was an option, there's good things about not only knowing one tool, one pipeline, one chain. This is where part of the challenge of historically the difference between a vocational type training as opposed to a more liberal arts, university, collegiate style approach to education is, are you learning the tool or are you learning principles that can outlast at a level of abstraction above and beyond whatever tool shifts underneath it? Was classic in one of those trade-offs, right? Companies that were just trying to very focus as a private institution on trying to get you a job as part of why Home Team's not fundamentally a jobs program was equivalent of, we're going to show you where to click in Maya. We're going to show you where to click in what to put into scripts to get a very precise, specific effects that there might be a job for it right now. And in 5 years, you might be up a creek because that's not how things are done anymore, as opposed to a more concept, abstract level where you might be doing things where the philosophy of it, the principles of it are sound, but you might never actually ship a product that's playable in a 4, 6, depending if you've got a master's in their education, in terms of practical stuff the industry needs at this moment, but you're more likely to still be doing it 10 years from now, as the often trade-off or the split there. This is where Unity for a while has been pretty mastered, right? It's a sort of this version of, I think about this old question about, if you took a writing class and they just taught you how to use Microsoft Word and didn't talk to you about creative writing process of rough draft and ideation and workshopping and incorporating feedback and structure and intent and all this kind of stuff, well, you'd be feeling shortchanged. But a lot of Unity instruction has for a while been about how to use the tool, not what to do with it. Not game design, but how to use Unity. Like how to drive a car as opposed to where to drive with it. And there are parts where you need that as a foundation a little bit, but not a lot of it before you need to start building practical stuff with it. But this is where out of the pipelines, we're already seeing diversification among students because we want to make sure that students are better insulated against their future options. And when students come to me with questions about different interest platforms, this is the stuff that I'm telling them from what I've seen for as long as they've been alive in the case of the undergraduates. And in the case of the business class, what are the questions? Let me just double check this email because again, this was getting discussed right before this. Question that this business student had was, is there a clear lesson that's going to be drawn from this for other game engines in the future about their business model, what they're doing? And to be excruciatingly blunt, to a level of which I think a lot of other people are not going to hear this from, but I'm sort of not afraid of these people. I don't think there will be, because it was such an ignorant, uninformed, out of touch, unwise from both a legal, business brand, business development, and technical perspective. So out of touch with the people who would be implementing the changes and who are affected by it, and their 1,000+ partners and companies bigger than them. I'm going to come back to that in a second. That the moral of the story is so obvious that if you need that moral of the story spelled out to you, you weren't going to be in business anyway. You weren't going to last. You fundamentally lack the competency to operate as a professional. Or you're just so deeply, wildly out there, you're not going to listen to a moral of a story anyway, because you're one of those people who I don't want to name him, people who will go make mistakes because until they've made the mistake for themselves, they won't believe any of the experts who try to warn them against it. Can't save those people from themselves. It's like the old trainer thing. You can't do push-ups for somebody. I can't make someone practice a skill if they don't want to practice it. You can't make a business not do something really stupid under the control of who's in control to make sense for it. Now, when I said even that thing about the bigger companies, about this tie-in for even the ones who are, they're not hobbyists. They're other end of the spectrum, right? They are venture capital raised, or they're big companies sheltering within their subsidiaries, operating these growth explosive pathway games on these certain tools and tech and pipelines. One of the various ways that Unity kept lying day of, changing their answer in response to journalists correctly, factually calling them out on details, that they were changing their answers in response to the public outlash to things that had never been discussed outside of a room full of very not smart people. One of the things that they kept changing, okay, well, we're not actually going after the small people. We're going after the bigger companies. We're going after, again, Microsoft or Nintendo, or which, again, just shatters the relationship of publishers to count on that platform, putting them on Game Pass or something. Or worse, no, actually, we're just going after the companies that have already used our product and are making a lot of money off of it. So don't fear those of you who are smaller companies, because we're only going after the ones who are already making good money on the terms that they entered an agreement with. And in case it does hope to have this spelled out, like I said, those hobbyists don't exist in a vacuum. Those small companies don't exist in a vacuum. Most of the small companies would like to become a more successful operation. And if, let's just say, ye olden days where I'm going to the shopping mall, I find out that the way a shopping mall is operating is that they rent spaces in their mall. Imagine 80s synthwave music play, which is not how it sounded, but so we imagine it does, thanks to Stranger Things, etc. So they're playing synthwave music in there, and they're figuring out, okay, well, this store is just really, really successful, right? They're paying the rent here, so we're just going to jack up the rates on them in particular because they're being successful. That's the kind of business we're going to operate. I'm not going to rent a shop space in that mall because I know that I don't know what deal I'm going to be pressured and stuck into after I have established with my customers that is how and where they can find me after I've brought in employees to serve that location, that geography. And so the equivalent right here in games is that these big companies that have been having successful results from the terms that they entered into with Unity saying, well, as soon as someone's successful, we're just going to go chase after and shake them down. It's going to also cause bigger companies to not want to build there either. Which, the stupidity of that, again, is that if from the business lens, never mind technology, never mind programming, never mind any of the other ways that just angered and frustrated a generation and a half of game programmers across the spectrum, professional down to hobbyist, down to giant company and everywhere in between, is it's just an unrecoverable flub to say that our plan as a business is to make money out of people who we are making a clear case don't do business with us. Don't trust us. You can't count on us to not change the terms the second we think you're stuck. The second we think you're trapped. That's our model. Not good business, can't do that. And it's a little bit like too much of a tangent here, but it's this general corner that the whole web has put themselves into, where you've probably observed this. A lot of streaming services, a lot of websites, their plan, right, is you'll pay us $4, $8, $11 a month, whatever, to not have to look at our ads, which has two tremendously, terribly misaligned incentives. One being that what it means is that they keep cranking up the pressure. YouTube is doing this too, so I apologize if you're seeing it here. But they keep cranking up the pressure on how bad of ads, how many minutes can they show you of how embarrassingly frustrating, poorly targeted ads that kids shouldn't see, that don't apply to you, that you're like, I am annoyed having to look at this and there's no way to shut it off. They do that as pressure to try to upsell you to pay them the $4, $8, $11 a month to make those ads go away so you don't have to look at them. Then, how many minutes they got to add? 3, 5, 7, 12? Whatever it takes, they're going to keep cranking that up until they get double the money from you. And on the other side of this, from businesses who are trying to advertise on those platforms, think about this. What's your ROI on advertising to a customer who won't pay $5 more a month to not be annoyed by you? Not very good. Not very good. You're not reaching a demographic who has disposable income if you cannot place ads in front of people who are earning enough and have enough extra padding in their lives and aren't deep in debt, etc., to be able to afford an extra $4 here, $8 there to not have to look at ads. You're selling to people who are already having a rough time of it in the culture and the world around. And there's obviously no blame on anybody in that who is affected on the other side of it. But that is not a great market to be trying to build your business around. We're just going to sell ads to people who don't have $4 more to spend a month. Good luck. Anywho, hopefully it wasn't too much of a rant. I know it probably is, but obviously, again, I'm frustrated, embarrassed on myself, on behalf of many of my peers as educators, on behalf of a lot of the developers, even after and how things shook out, and even after and with John Riccatello having stepped away from it. Still mad. And then finding ways to harness that, right? Always be like, can I use this energy to do something good in it? And if nothing else, again, this is where I think some of the good is the diversification of portfolio and experience. I'm not saying don't use and don't do Unity. It's a goop. It has its place in the ecosystem. It's still being used in certain serious games applications. It's still being used for rapid prototyping. It's still a fluent, common language in the near term of platforms. Longer term, I would encourage diversifying. I think it's only going to behoove you. And you might also surprise yourself, right? This is one of the things a lot of programmers go through, is that early on they kind of get stuck to whatever thing they first learned. C++ or PHP or ActionScript 3 for Flash, it might have been for Generation F or whatever. But as soon as you start trying one or two other scripting languages or programming languages, you start to realize, well, this isn't too different. It's a little different. You've got a few other hooks and things to figure out, but it's not wildly different, right? It's like people who used to feel like, oh, I'm definitely only 3D Studio or definitely only Maya or only Blender. And as soon as they actually try another one, they're like, well, it's not called lathe here, or the pads work a little different, or something's not quite the same and the menu's stashed somewhere else. But once I figure out the equivalent of how to weld verts and other stuff, it's not wildly different, right? It's learnable. You might positively surprise yourself as you try to diversify your experience across Godot or Godot or JavaScript in browser or Unity or Unreal, how like and unlike many pieces of them can be and are, to help free yourself from being locked into any one. That is where also kind of consideration there, right, is that on a portfolio, if you're interviewing for a position, you might think that a recruiter, that an outside company could just look at you as a technical person and say, well, they could figure this out as they go. But they're more inclined to want to take a chance on somebody who has already figured it out, who's already shown that, yes, I can. It's this old, I think it's a Henry Wadsworth, something quote, right, of we see ourselves as what we're capable of, other people see us as what we've done. It's an invitation to fill out your portfolio with other stuff, other kind of projects. Now, this is where partly, of course, I got to give it this little pitch. I react to these things, right, and it's part of why I'm able to react to them, because I'm not only teaching an institution, although my classroom there is also flexible to what tools you're in. It's why in home teaming, we've doubled the amount of Unreal trainers. We have 2 Unreal trainers now. Specifically, one of them has a recent background leading a bunch of Unity games, so is helping our developers who are shifting out of, they've been using Unity for years. Now they're trying to figure out how to apply their same thinking process and things around the quirks and challenges particular to using Unreal to do similar kind of projects. That's happening in home team game dev. In addition to, we still have JavaScript on Canvas as pre-engine fundamentals. Although there we've opened up as a pipeline. Now we have a new phaser project. People are discussing 3JS or other options. We used to do vanilla only for JavaScript, figuring if we wanted APIs, well, that's people were moving into Unity early days, or increasingly Godot or Unreal. Well, now because of what Unity's done, we're also increasingly allowing and building and supporting as a collective community other kind of outside network or frameworks and APIs on JavaScript, which again aren't quite a game engine in the same sense, right? You're not dragging and dropping inside a JS phaser, but you're also not having to rewrite your own sprite sheets, which was for us partly the exercise we used to do in the pre-engine phase for learning fundamentals, like when I used to make DOS games in the 90s. And then again, we've also got Godot or Godot, however you like to say it, experiences. I think I've even just heard someone else say it a third way recently. Anywho, it's something where we also have that going on, including we've got a member long time in industry with us, who this is where he does projects in that engine as just an outlet, because he just finds it refreshing as a different lens and look at doing game design, where when you get experience across different platforms and engines, as we are now encouraging more and more of inside a home team, you can also start to see things at a better level of abstraction, where you can start to apply, what was the way I approached it in this engine or framework? How can I convert or wrap that into a part of my pipeline, a tool to give me a strength and advantage in some other environment? So now I have the powers of both at my disposal conceptually to working at a better level of abstraction. One of my favorite professors when I was in grad student, Ian Bogost, I think these days he's at WashU, at the time he was at Georgia Tech. He used to teach a class where every single week they had to shift programming languages, which is obviously excessive, but it was partly done for the conceptual benefit of you're going to see the common pattern between them. You're going to figure out what are the underlying fundamentals about variables and about functions and about conditionals and about loops and about what things exist beyond the semantics of where the semicolon goes, how we call functions. You got the gist. Anyway, probably long enough. I'm probably starting to deviate into too many other unrelated things. That's my feelings on how Unity has shaken out now that the smoke has mostly settled. If you have been building a long-term camp in there, again, like leverage that, use it to your advantage, find partnerships, opportunities, do things with it. Don't feel embarrassed about it. It's not too late. This is more so forward-looking of 5 years, 10 years from now. I think you might be better off if you also diversify your portfolio a bit on the side. I think it's going to increase the amount of opportunities you might be seeing out of mid-sized studios, larger studios, smaller teams. And part of how this stuff works, right, is if fundamentally, the people in decision-making roles cannot be trusted to be competent, to be ethical, to be honest, which they failed all three very quickly at the same time, without being in touch with their customers or people who are actually using their environment or anyone else in that pipeline of those decisions, any one of whom would have explained to them very clearly everything I just said here. Then what also winds up happening is you're building on a sandy foundation that's not going to last. It raises the risk of not only is the market drying up for what you're doing, but that it is under such failed leadership, such inability to direct that ship steadily, it may not be here in 5 years. It may not be here in 10 years. That may seem like a lot to say. I shipped Flash games played by millions of people, so I know what I'm talking about from that too. Anyway, that's it. Thanks, y'all. I've also made a bunch of games at Objective-C. That's also gone. Anyway, that's it. Thanks, y'all. I will see you around next time. Thanks for following along. Let me know in the comments if you have thoughts and feelings about this. If you disagree with me, that's okay. We've all seen different things. You have a different lens, different perspective than peers, different set of projects and things. If you've heard the opposite, I genuinely would appreciate that view from you as well to help calibrate me against. I know I see certain things from my opportunities, connections, peers, circles, generation shift, including current grad students, current undergrads, people I guess speak in business classes, etc. Want to hear from you as well as just another person I respect to appear out there in the game development scene. That's it, y'all. Thanks again. Catch you next time.